this is nostalgic for me. Come, let me show you something. All right, so this is the Bender Library at American University. And I remember when I started doing the podcast solo, most of my episodes were booked here. Remember, this was pre-pandemic, so Zoom wasn't a popular thing. A lot of people were still using like WebEx and whatnot. Like Zoom wasn't popular. So what I'll do as a student of American University, I'll come to the library and book this room. And I remember like I had like a couple of cool interviews in this room. Like I interviewed Ty, about the basketball, her basketball story. And I interviewed Morgan about her travel story, both in this library. And Ty and Morgan were very awesome people, but they came all the way. They weren't students, by the way, but they came to American University to be interviewed in this library. But because the library had like a transparent door, and it's supposed to be a quiet library, when we're recording the podcast, like, there'll be laughs and all that, and then the library staff will come and then they'll see us recording through the glass, and they'll be like, you can't record there. And we'll be like, can you give us like 10 more minutes? And then we'll spend like 30 more minutes. But yeah, this was where like I started to kind of like find space to record, and it brings back memories. Yeah, this is like the School of Communication, and this is where Tongwa was. So I was in the School of Business, which we'll go to in a bit, but Tongwa was a student in the School of Communication. And for School of Communication students, they had access to a studio, right? And that was the studio we used to record. I want to say like our first 5 episodes. We started recording like November 2018, and we released the first podcast episode like December 2018. But in the School of Communication at American University is where culture class started, and you hear me talk about it on the podcast a lot. So come on, let's go in and I'll show you. That's actually a tour. I used to have that job when I was in school. It's like getting people whose kids want to go to school and like touring the facility. That used to be me back in the day. There's a media production center that used to be at the back. And let's see if we can find it somewhere. I'm not sure. And there are some things that weren't here when I was here, so I'm not quite sure where we are going to. That building wasn't there. I think they were building it when I was supposed to be some National Science Foundation thing. I don't know. And then these are the halls. Like I was a graduate student, so I never stayed in the dorms, but these were the dorms. So let's see if we can locate the Media Production Center where the studio was, where we recorded our very first episode of Culture Class. Oh, this is the Hall of Science. Oh yeah, that makes sense, because I think it was money from the National Science Foundation that built this building. I want to say. I can't remember. Shout out to President Sylvia Burwell. She used to be the president when I was a student, and I think she was like in the Obama administration or something. But right now, whoever the new president is, Sylvia Burwell was an awesome president, university president when I was back here. And here's the Media Production Center. I remember this now. All right, so this is the SOC Media Production Center, and this is where the studio was, where we actually recorded like the first 5 episodes. And we can go in and see what it looks like and if the equipment's still there. We'll see. Let me see if I can ask someone if we can take a peek, because typically you need a like student ID. But we'll see. We'll see if we can do something. So this was the lab at the studio, where we started to record culture class. As you can see, or maybe not as you can see, you know what we should do? We should put like the old video of me and Tongwa in the old lab. Hi, Tongwa. What exactly are you trying to do?
I'm setting up our Spreaker account.
What is Spreaker?
It's like an audio recording software that will allow us to bring you culture class goodness.
Okay, cool. And this is it's like a 1982 studio, right?
Like, I don't know if it's 1982.
One of those studios.
But I need to explore.
Yeah.
All right. Done.
When did you wake up this morning?
5:30.
Okay.
5:45.
Cool.
Well, 5:30 and then 5.
Oh my God! Look at that phone.
Bro, are you really like doing this right now?
I'm like, no, it's funny. But now I see they have more, a much more recent or professional microphones. They have like your mixers and your screens. But yeah, Tongo and I will be in this little room, and the idea is that we wanted to have like our first 5 or 6 episodes in the bank before we started to publish, because we're both like busy students at the time. So we wanted to make sure that if we missed a week of an episode, we had like episodes in the bank. So we recorded like our first 5 episodes right here. So there you go. This is where it all started. So this is where they locked all the keys. This is where they'll lock the key to the studio. So only School of Communication people will be able to swipe their student ID to be able to get a key, and then you're limited. And that's why I needed Tongar, because I was in the business school, so I didn't have access to all this. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, I started culture class because, so I was an international student at the time, 5 years ago. Growing up, I grew up with a military dad back in Nigeria. And because of the nature of his job, we moved around the country of Nigeria a lot. So, I developed this affinity for other cultures, and this is probably something people on the podcast have, the story they've heard 1,000 times. But so moving to DC, coming to school to AU, was such an international city that I had friends from Nepal, I had friends from Mongolia, from Kenya, from all these places that I was interacting with just by virtue of living in DC. And we would have all these interesting conversations. I remember when I came here the first few weeks of being in American, I learned about Diwali and, that whole culture. So I just like, hey, why not just start a podcast? I'm already having some of these conversations offline with my friends. So why not just start something to document it? And that's kind of like how it started. I mean, what brought me to the States was more so just like, opportunity, right? Like, everyone hear about the American dream growing up. I thought the easiest way to do that was through school, which, kind of like in hindsight, maybe turned out to be right. So like, hey, get a graduate degree, that'll be cool. And actually I was supposed to go to University of Buffalo, right? I had already paid the deposit at the University of Buffalo, but then when I went to Buffalo, I was like, oh wow, like, cause my dad would always tell me something like, don't just pass through school, let school pass through you. So even before coming, I didn't know I was going to start a podcast, but I knew I was going to do other things outside of school, right? So when I looked at Buffalo, I was like, okay, like besides going to school, there's not a lot of things in that little town. Shout out to the people in Buffalo, but I think DC, so I reached back out to AU and I was like, is my admission still okay? They're like, yeah. Like, okay, I think I'm coming to DC instead. And that's kind of like how I ended up here. Yeah, several. There were several. Like I went for a talk where Daryl Davis, for instance. So Daryl Davis he was on the Joe Rogan podcast and all these other podcasts. He lives in DC and he's a black man who would make friends with members of the KKK, right? So I thought that was a very interesting story. I went to a seminar, a talk, where he spoke at American University, and I approached him after that. So that was an example. I'll go to parties like Romina Ferreira, her episode, she's from Uruguay, And I think I was at a party, I can't remember what it is, but I met Romina and we're connecting over soccer. So, like I remember, Uruguay, the Uruguayan team were very good at soccer in, previous World Cups, and she was talking to me about the country. I was like, you know what, like, where do you live? Can I come to your apartment and record an episode tomorrow? And we did that. And then actually, I think it was episode, I want to say like 5, 6, 7. It was kind of like the first 10 episodes. I was actually at a party. I'd come from recording an episode, so I had my equipment with me. And I was at a party with Kara and Ntanze from Kenya. Kara is American from Florida. And these other people were having this interesting conversation. And I just brought out my equipment. And that episode, the sound wasn't the best, because there was all this background noise because of the party, but I just like whipped it out and just recorded that conversation. Everyone contributed. So that was kind of like how I was living. So mostly I think now, after releasing almost 200 episodes, like if I do a percentage, it's probably like right now maybe 60 or 7% on Zoom. But back in the day, again, this was pre-pandemic, so I started from university booking a lot of my episodes in the college library here on AU, or maybe in the studio here. But I graduated to use the District of Columbia library system. So what I'll do, I'll ask someone, where do you live? And if he says he lives in this part of town, I'll try to get a library location close to that part of town. I had a library card, and I'll book a room and we'll go record there, so it was closer to their house. But obviously the pandemic made me start to use Zoom more. As far as like a location I enjoyed, I don't know, like there's no specific location. I'll just say maybe the one where I just whipped out my camera at a party and we started recording is not so much the physical location, but just like the aura of that authenticity of being recorded at a party was pretty fun. I don't want to miss anyone out, but I mean, Daryl Davis was a pretty interesting story. I mean, the black guy who I said befriended members of the KKK, Elvis Leone. Elvis Leone is his father was kidnapped in Guatemala, and he was sharing that story of how it was like for his family, being kidnapped in Guatemala. I think that was a pretty interesting story. I had a conversation with, let me see who else is there. I've had conversations with all types of people. Asetu Jango, she's like a poet. She had the episode called Me Goddess, which was very powerful. She opened up with like spoken word. I think that was pretty interesting episode. The episode I did with Tongwa were always interesting. I had an episode with a Nigerian musician called LD, kind of like one of the pioneers of Afrobeats. He was very, very gracious as well, because he was so big where I come from. And he was able to sit down on the mic with me and talk. I think that was pretty interesting. But yeah, there are a whole bunch of episodes. I'm trying to like scroll through my phone to see. Gada was also interesting, and Gada is from Saudi Arabia, and it was interesting also, like asking about her culture and things like that. So yeah, just a whole bunch of episodes that way. And Zuby as well. Zuby is this controversial, like right-wing type person who's been around on the internet as well. He was on the podcast for a few as well. Arlen Hamilton, the venture capitalist, she was gracious enough. So there's a bunch of people. Like, forgive me if I didn't mention your name, I forget, but it's been almost 200 episodes, but those are some people who come to mind. The original idea for the podcast was to have 2 other ladies to be on the podcast. Who I had talked to them, they both agreed, and it was just going to be 3 of us talking about life and just like talking about. It was me who came from Nigeria, an international student. It was in Nigeria who mostly grew up in the States, and then it was a lady who was white from Kentucky. So we're just gonna talk about those cultural differences. Unfortunately, it took me a while. I was kind of like dragging my feet that first year, and they both ended up graduating. So I was working on campus at the time. I was like, okay, what am I gonna do for my second year? I was working on campus, and we got a new campus employee, and that was Tongwa, right? We're both working at the Office of Graduate Studies, trying to, call previous alumni and prospective students and things like that. And then she came in and she introduced herself, and the moment she said, "Hi, my name is Tongwa. I am in the School of Communication. My name is Nosa. I'm in the business school. Welcome. Immediately she said the School of Communication, like a light bulb went up in my own. Okay, those guys have equipment. I know they have a studio. I'd already spent a year not doing this podcast, so much so my two would-be co-hosts graduated. Let me just take advantage of this with Tongwa while she's here at the School of Communication. I pitched her the idea, and she was already creative. Like, she would sing, and she had like a YouTube channel. So, she bought into it, right away. And, we did was it 10 or 15 episodes as co-hosts together before I kind of like went solo? That's an interesting question because, everything I've planned to do in my life, like it'll just be some version of that tiny bit and then it goes left into another thing. And to provide context to this, like one of the original, like there were a bunch of horrible names I thought about for the podcast initially. Like I wanted to call it Okra Soup Podcast. I wanted to call it the Returnee Podcast. Kind of like, because I was planning like, okay, I'll document my experiences in the US, and I was thinking I'll go back to Nigeria after graduating. I'm like, okay, I'm returning back to Nigeria, returning podcast. So it was more so, the original idea was kind of like to document an immigrant's journey from my perspective in the US. And that's what me and Tongwa did for the first few episodes, right? We're like, okay, Tongwa is from Cameroon, although she's been in the US since she was a teenager. So we'll talk about this Nigerian Cameroonian dynamics and different things and Black culture and things like that. But especially when Tongwa left, my story started getting old. I'm like, okay, I've talked about myself a bunch of times. Tongwa is no longer here. I'm not sure if the stories can start to resonate. And that's kind of like when I met Gada, who was, I think Gada was one of my first guests, I want to say. And she was from the Middle East. And, that's when I realized, I don't, having a podcast called Culture Class, it doesn't always have to be about my culture. I can get guests and then talk to them, and then they'll tell me about their experiences and where they come from. And it started me talking about my culture, my experiences. It graduated to talking about other people's culture and experiences, and then it graduated to becoming not just cultural experiences, but about life, about politics, about religion, and a bunch of other things. Every month my life gets too busy. And to be honest, like I'm not doing the podcast to monetize or anything like that. Like I don't even know if I'm the most creative person in the world, but the people I meet through the podcast is kind of like what has kept me going. What's next for the podcast? I'm not sure, to be honest. On certain days, I think the podcast has run its course. 5 years, because I started as a student. I'm doing so many other things now. I've actually thought or explored the possibility of starting another podcast, more so talking about business and finance, relating to what I'm doing with work. But Culture Class is always going to live on. I always thought about taking Culture Class to the next step, because I've interviewed people from over 50 countries. Some of these people that I met in the US have traveled back home. Some people I interviewed remotely in their countries. So I know all these people from all these amazing countries, and I've always thought about traveling and connecting with all those people who have been in the podcast and getting to visit Tanzania, getting to visit Russia, getting to visit all these places from people I've had on the podcast. And it'd be nice to maybe do that in video form. So it's kind of becomes like a travel blog, but I don't know. I'll still try to do that. So I think it really depends. I'm not sure what the future is, but I'm just grateful that we're here 5 years later and it still exists. I think they're having some type of game here today. Looks like a soccer game. So we came at the right time then. Let's see here. Interesting practice field that's out here. There we go. It's actually interesting with soccer, because when I was in college, the Eagles, which is a basketball team, I think they were part of the Pac-10 conference or something. I don't know if we won a lot. Georgetown was probably the favorites in school, because they had Erwin, what's his name, Coach Johnson or something. But interesting to see soccer here on campus, because I never really saw soccer when I was here at AU. But yeah, sometimes after the studio, I'll just come, or maybe if we're waiting for the studio to get opened, you know, I'll just come here and walk around and try to like process thoughts and whatnot. And you know, maybe I had like exams and whatnot. I also come here to decompress, just walk around the track and just chill. But yeah, this was also like a interesting part of my stay at AU. Oh yeah, there's a very famous speech by JFK on this campus in the 60s. Yeah, the video is still in black and white online somewhere. So yeah. All right, this is the Mary Radin Center, MGC. And this is kind of like the student center where most of the undergrads spend their time and whatnot. But sometimes, you know, you come here and if you have like a pre-interview, you know, you'll come talk to the person here first, and then you guys look for a location to do the actual interview and stuff like that. So, oh, we're having a concert here. Yeah, it was pretty loud in there, but I think that's the professor's lounge, or is it? I'm not sure. There's a student lounge and there's a professor lounge. So actually, that might not be the professor lounge because it's not that open. It's very closed off in a way, but probably the student lounge. They're having that. And then this is the campus store. And that's the business school right there, which we'll go to in a second. And that's the tunnel. Oh, it's closed. Okay. So they might be constructing, but that's the campus store. It's probably closed, but yeah, get all the AU swag and whatnot. But I'm not even sure if this is an AU video or culture class video at this point, but just to show you guys like where the podcast was started, where it was birthed. And then I have a very cool picture from this tunnel from graduation. Yeah, this tunnel connects to the Bender Arena, which is where they have all the basketball games and whatnot. But yeah, I have a cool picture with me and my brother here in graduation. I was wearing like my graduation gown. Maybe I'll put that so you guys see how that was. But you know, he came for graduation to say hello, and it's pretty interesting. And this is Bender Arena, like the sports arena, where we have like all the games. And I wonder if the basketball court is open. Let's see. A whole bunch of cool stuff here. And this area was so close to the business school. So I would have classmates who come work out here before classes in the morning and just scoot over to the business school. American University always loved to have like elephants and donkeys around campus. I'm sure there's a donkey somewhere, like Democrats and Republicans, you know. So I'm sure where there's an elephant is probably like well, there it is, probably like a donkey in the other place. So there we go, keeping it balanced. Of these people, but obviously there's a Hall of Fame here, so shout out to these guys for achieving great stuff. Dates all the way back to 1926. Interesting. And as the years go by, you see how the Hall of Fame gets a little more diverse. You have a lot more women, and you know, some people of color. as a graduation arena and special events arena. And, you know, whenever they wanted to have stuff, they'll probably do it here. So I think this is where they had a graduation ceremony and whatnot. So right now it's being used for volleyball, but it was basketball back in the day, and you can still see the court and whatnot. And I was a flag bearer as well during graduation, so I have pictures with me like holding the flag and walking on stage and whatnot. But yeah, you know, one thing my dad always said is don't just pass through school, let school also pass through you. And that's something I'm going to transfer to my kids, because, you know, I've always remembered that growing up, like, hey, whenever you're somewhere, like, don't just focus, even if you're at work, like, don't just focus on just your job, like, interact with your colleagues, like, get to know what the company does and not just what your job requires. Like, you know, put yourself out there, and that's like the spirit I've always carried on. So shout out to you, Dad, for imbibing that in me when I was much younger. There's a cool amphitheater somewhere here, or that used to be here. Let's see if it's still there, or if they knocked it over somehow. And, you know, I just tried to, there are a lot of people I went to class that were in my class that would just, they just go to class in the business school, and the business school was kind of like all they knew. But I tried to explore the entire campus in the 2 years I was here. I was like, man, I have to check out every single thing. And sometimes students who come here and, like, I think there are some comedy shows here. I think there was like some people come play like a little set with a guitar, no speakers, just like pretty cool. There's like a little stage there. And, you know, people would just come over here and, like, you know, hang out. So places like this is where you get to meet people from other colleges. So even though I was in the business school, I'll meet people from the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Public Affairs, the School of Law, like all these places, you know, just by hanging out and doing whatnot. Yeah, I thought it was very important to kind of like show my listeners the environment that birthed culture class. This was it. So people have been listening to me for 5 years. You know, you guys have been hearing about me talking about starting the podcast at American University. This is American University. So I just wanted to give you guys a little taste, as much as you can get. Yeah, I'm in DC for a few days, so happy I can show you guys around. But this is the last stop, or I guess it depends on how this video is going to be edited, but this is a stop, probably. And this is the business school. Long way from Lagos, Nigeria, long way from Ekiti, Nigeria. Here it is, the Kogat School of Business. I'm filming this in the rain, so you guys should know this is dedication, huh? Maybe this is what dedication looks like, I don't know. Yeah, this is the Kogat School of Business. It's where I got my MBA. You know, it's really what exposed me to a lot of things I'm doing now, because I have a consulting company myself. A lot of things I learned were learned in this building. When I was a student, we were required to come here almost every week to get our resumes perfected in the Office of Career Engagement. And, you know, every little full stop, I remember like I added like an extra period on my resume. So they're like, that period shouldn't be there. These guys were very good at what they did, so. These were the classes, one of the classes. And this is where I had my cybersecurity classes. I had some of my marketing classes. No, marketing classes were in the other room actually, but cybersecurity, some finance classes, you know, always looked like a boardroom and whatnot. I was always seated at the back, always. Like, I never sat out front. So we'll be out here 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. A lot of people hated it, But I loved it because I was done with school before noon. And then afternoon, I could go record the podcast, do other things, go for my internship, and do a bunch of other things. I want to show you guys the Financial Information Center, where we were all pretending to be stockbrokers and looking at financial reports all day and whatnot. Financial Services Information Lab, and you have all these Bloomberg information terminals and the stock market 24/7. So some people we hear day trading in the middle of class while the professor's on front, they're like at the computer day trading. Other people are like doing assignments with the terminals. And we'll have all these assignments to like analyze different financial statements and whatnot. So yeah, and we had like a marketing lab somewhere where they'll fix all these. They had all these interesting experiments they'll run, like they'll put things on your head and like show you ads and how your brain responds to ads and whatnot. Oh, that's Gary Cohn. So Gary Cohn was the Chief Operating Officer, not CEO, COO of Goldman Sachs, and he'll come back to campus every once in a while. But yeah, he'll stop by, and anytime he's being interviewed by like Bloomberg or some of these CNBC, he'll like to do the interview on campus just to also showcase the campus. So he was a very cool alumni. Yeah, so that's it. That's how culture class came to be. Yeah, I know the podcast has, because people have told me it has, and the way I approach it, I approach it from a sense of like curiosity, and people have said things that have been off on the podcast, and because I don't record live, I'll have a phone call with that person later and say, look, I'm gonna cut this part out, but this is why that doesn't make sense. And we'll have this whole discussion, and the person will get to respect me after and say, oh no, I appreciate you not just like coming and like, coming with the heat and trying to beat me down, or, want to do a clickbait with that, like this is a teachable moment. So we've had those types of things on the podcast, and we're very great friends. So today, I mean, I'm just a little podcast out here, so one can argue that the scale of it might not be, hey, it's changing the whole country, but hey, my own little way, like within my group of people I'm interacting with, it has opened people's minds, both my guests and the listeners as well. And no, I just want to shout out to the classmates. I want to shout out on Chooks. I want to shout out, all our day one listeners, and thank you to all the great guests. And yeah, appreciate you guys for being with us and rocking with us for this long. And shout out to the people at Podbreak as well. Podbreak is a collection of African podcasters. Culture Class was one of the founding podcasters of that. And again, just meeting people and whatnot, what it has grown to. So shout out to everyone. The podcast got me a job. Like it's been a very interesting journey, because I went to an interview once, and the interview involved, like talking to immigrants and like working for CDFI and all these things. And because of the podcast, I could demonstrate that, hey, like I've been exposed to all these different cultures, and this would be a right fit. So, but yeah, it's just been an interesting journey. So thank you for everyone for supporting. Thank you to my former boss who would allow me record out of the conference room at 5 p.m. Yeah, like she's like, okay, you can do this after work. Like, once it's 5 p.m., people leave the office, your guests can come into the office and we can record out of the conference room. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So thank you to my brother. Thank you to everyone who's done amazing stuff on behalf of the podcast, for the podcast, in collaboration with the podcast. Thank you so much.